SpongeBob is a character with no need for introduction, as his show is easily one of the most popular cartoons of all time, and his lost media is one of the most popular to research. I'm not sure if it's something related to SpongeBob himself, the kind of lost content that he's been featured in, or simply the fact that he's connected to the Nickelodeon lost media rabbit hole, but topics involving the little yellow guy have always been a fan favorite, both in the lost media community and even outside of it. Over the span of the many years of lost SpongeBob content, there have been so many famous searches like Astrology with Squidward and A Day with SpongeBob, as well as some smaller ones too, like the Got Milk commercial and MTV video mods. The range of content and interest is so wide with these topics that SpongeBob feels like it's become its own category of lost media, and in today's video, I'd like to focus in more on these lesser known topics that could be considered very rare, and go deeper into the rabbit hole of lost content from this series, with a couple of topics that I am particularly looking forward to covering in this video. And there are a couple in here that you might have come across yourself. When it comes to the history of SpongeBob and his early years of development, there is a certain level of interest to be had that doesn't quite come from any later era of the show. I think this is the result of a historical standpoint more than anything else, getting to look at SpongeBob from a drastically different point in time, compared to how we see the character nowadays and know him so well. And for that reason, it's not uncommon to see cells from early episodes sell for hundreds, or ARGs that try to take us back to the late 90s. But aside from these, there's a sort of time capsule that exists, which embodies the early spirit of the show, and is claimed to contain some goodies within. However, it hasn't been completely found yet, becoming an item highly coveted by collectors and archivists alike. This piece of lost media is the SpongeBob SquarePants press kit from 1999, the first piece of SpongeBob merchandise to ever be distributed for the show. For those unaware, a press kit is essentially an advertisement for an upcoming product that is given out to industry employees and the media in order to help promote the product and hype it up. And the SpongeBob one is no exception, as we can get a peek at what its contents contain from a few photos of it that exist online. The Lost Media Wiki states that these photos came from an eBay auction of the kit, apparently the only one that's ever occurred, which means we wouldn't have any idea this exists if it hadn't been for that one sale. I tried to look on WorthPoint to see if I could find an archive of this listing, but nothing came up, so it's not clear who the seller was or how they acquired it specifically. And as for the content itself, there's quite a bit that was revealed, including a letter announcing its premiere, episode summaries, and an overview of the show itself. However, what's most interesting about this one, and why it's become rather desired, is the notoriety of its title. This press kit is commonly referred to as the Ain't Life a Beach kit, due to an inserted card that uses that name. It's a pun on that old phrase. Though interestingly, an official book was published in 2001 by Nickelodeon called Life's a Beach, that was said to be marketed towards adults, and feels like an obvious reference to this press kit's tagline. The Lost Media Wiki article also states that more of the kit's content contains raunchy taglines and pop culture references that were quickly dropped from the show's advertising. But aside from the title, nothing else that fits that description is visible in the pictures we've seen. It's a mystery what else is in here, but it seems likely that it'll remain that way, because as far as I'm aware, no other copies of this press kit have ever resurfaced, and there's not even that much information online about them. One of the only other places online that even mentions the press kit is the SpongeBob Wiki, though its article doesn't provide any other details about it. It is mentioned, however, that this press kit has been seen in the backgrounds of several DVD special features, though these are not specifically listed or shown. I'm guessing it appears on the back shelves of employees during interviews, or somewhere around Nickelodeon studios. It's definitely likely that more are still out there. When you think about older pieces of SpongeBob lost media that were being searched for in the late 2010s, the rehydrated animated short is one that has to be brought up, and probably feels nostalgic to a lot of people. This is actually the second topic of the video because, believe it or not, the complete production has yet to be found, and I think everyone kind of forgot about that, or that it was even a thing at all. It's been years at this point since the initial search, so for those who didn't follow the topic back in the day, SpongeBob Rehydrated is a CGI short that aired on Nickelodeon back in the early 2000s, with a concept that heavily parodies the Matrix films down to the wardrobe the characters appear in. Actually, this detail would lead to a claim that the short's actual title was The Sponge Tricks, which was passed around during its initial discovery in 2016, after a clip showing its existence was found from a channel bumper that aired in 2003. At the time, it was believed that the entire animation was around 10 minutes long, and nobody knew why it even existed in the first place, especially having been CGI and not the usual 2D animation that SpongeBob materials were made with. Vincent Waller, who was often contacted about SpongeBob Lost Media for his involvement with production of the show, initially dismissed this as an unofficial piece of animation, before admitting that he knew nothing about it. If you were following the search back then, you might remember how it spread from its initial discussion on 4chan to the Lost Media Wiki and SpongeBob communities, where it gained the recognition that it still has to this day. I remember back then, I always wanted to make a dedicated video talking about the topic, but the search effort seemed to be moving too fast to keep up with a video. And it was through this quick spread how people were able to find more content from it. Only a few months after the search began, the portfolio of a Nick digital animator named Randy Gossman was located, and in it contained 30 seconds of the short. Through an interaction with him, all was revealed, including that the official title of the short was SpongeBob Rehydrated, and was supposed to be a parody of The Matrix Reloaded. He released a statement on the SpongeBob Wiki back in 2017, and stated that the animation was, in part, a little something extra that the Employee of the Month animation team thought would be funny. Nick may have used it in some of their continuity. No, it was not a 10-minute short, and there was no videotape of it sold. It was not a lost episode. It was less than a minute long, and the 40-second YouTube clip I was sent shows all that we ever made. The writers at Nick Animation were not involved in it at all. They were never involved in the animation for video games with Nick Digital, which is why the show directors wouldn't have known about it. Despite the animation having been recovered not long after the search began, the audio was not included with the copy from Gossman's portfolio, and to this day, it remains lost. Gossman's copy used generic audio that is heard throughout his entire demo, but claims that the short originally had a different audio track with sound effects, and makes no mention of having it. I'm kind of surprised that after all these years since the animation was found, no one has come across a recording of this from when it aired on TV. However, I feel like this is a topic that can definitely be found by looking through old VHS tapes and getting more people to rediscover its existence. We know it aired in 2003, with The Matrix Reloaded film having been released in May of the same year. It seems likely that Nickelodeon would have aired the short during this time, so direct your efforts to April, May, and June of 2003. And while this isn't necessarily a topic that we have to contact anyone else about, it's possible there are others at Nickelodeon who would have access to it, or perhaps Randy Gossman has contacts with other copies. It doesn't seem like anyone asked about that at the time, but I still believe we can find this on a VHS tape that someone recorded and doesn't know they have. I'd love to conclude this years-old mystery and find a little bit of old lost media for the community. Another one of my favorite topics from this video takes us to the Lost Media Wiki forums for a SpongeBob mystery that feels like it came right out of the late 2010s era of the community. Now, I should mention that this topic is a little bit of an existence unconfirmed mystery, so it's not completely clear whether or not it's a real piece of lost media. But if it is real, then it definitely would be considered very rare. It's so rare that only a few claims have even made mention of its existence. But I believe it's a search worth following for the fact that we'd like a solid answer on its status. The thread is titled Lost SpongeBob Closing Logo and discusses an alternate version of the United Plankton Pictures logo seen at the end of SpongeBob. But before we get any further, for those unaware, if you've never heard of the term closing logo before, these are the short ending cards seen at the conclusion of the credits in an episode or show. One of the more popular examples is the AKA cartoon one from Ed, Edd n Eddy, and apparently there is a really big community surrounding these closing logos. So what this topic describes is a variation in SpongeBob's closing logo. featuring United Plankton Pictures, something everyone has probably seen at least a few times before. In the normal closing logo, the logo is seen as sounds of seagulls chirping and waves crashing play. But recently, claims have been spotted that mention there is another version of this closing logo that hasn't been documented before. Nostalgia Guy started the thread by stating, "There's been a trivia tidbit for the logo on the CLG wiki for years, that early split-screen credits of SpongeBob featured a foghorn noise over the logo instead of the usual seagulls and crashing wave noises. Does anyone know if this is true or if recordings exist?" The first few posts from other users claim to recall a foghorn variant, and mention that it was present in DVD releases or in some YouTube uploads, which might have been from VHS captures, but in both of these cases, no foghorn variant was found. Considering the rarity of this variant, if it really does exist, I would expect it wasn't used for very long, and would be easier to source with a more refined time frame of where to search. General Ironbeak provided some more insight about this, and said that the earliest split-screen credits for SpongeBob used audio from the ending theme song, with the earliest use of the seagull chirping audio being from April 2002. This leads to the belief that sometime during the transition of the ending theme song audio and the seagulls that we know so well, a foghorn was used in between. He also pointed out that the information that mentioned the foghorn variant's existence on the Closing Logos wiki was not sourced, but had been known about for a long time. This fact got me particularly curious because it reminded me a lot of Astrology with Squidward, and how segments that never existed were added anonymously by someone to the Wikipedia article in the mid-2000s. Nostalgia Guy did end up finding the user that added them, however, they hadn't been active since 2014 and couldn't be found anywhere else in the community, so we can't ask them where they got that information from. This resulted in a more hands-on approach to the search for the foghorn variant, attempting to search through premiere airings of SpongeBob in the hopes of finding it. Season 2 episodes contained the most amount of split-screen credits, and General Ironbeak looked through a few episodes, but they all contained the seagull audio. The fact that these episodes so early in the timeline do not use the foghorn highly suggests that it doesn't exist, but it's not 100% proof that the search is over. Vincent Waller was also contacted about this, but it doesn't seem like he replied, and there's no guarantee he'd remember either way. I don't want to add unverified speculation to this topic, but there's something about it that felt like it brought back a repressed memory for me. I could have sworn as a kid I remember seeing the foghorn variant at least a couple times, and getting scared by how unexpected it was, hoping that every time I watched SpongeBob, it would be an episode that didn't use it. I can't say how accurate that is or is not, because the same sentiment was shared with claims that there was a scene of Squidward transforming into a snail, and that wasn't real either. More searching will determine if this topic really exists or if it is just a false memory. The next topic I'd like to discuss is more of an honorable mention since it isn't as interesting as the other ones and doesn't really have a dedicated search, but was brought to my attention recently, so I decided it would be cool to give it a mention. If you guys remember back a few years ago, during the search for Astrology with Squidward, there was a short clip of Squidward wearing a turban that resurfaced, and it sent people into a frenzy, thinking that this might have been a continuation of the main series of shorts we were looking for. Unfortunately, that ended up not being the case, because after looking into it closer, it was discovered to be a bumper from a special summer block called SpongeBob's Nicktoon Summer Splash. Apparently, this was one of dozens of different bumpers that were made for the promotion, featuring unique animation and dialogue of SpongeBob and his friends, who would host it daily. And over the years, there's been a small effort in getting more content from this saved. Back when the Squidward turban clip was first found, I'm not sure how much other content was saved, but if you look on YouTube nowadays, there's quite a lot of content from it that can be viewed. The Lost Media Wiki, on the other hand, has an article that highlights a few notable bumpers that have been confirmed to exist, but haven't been found in full yet. What's unfortunate about this topic, however, is the amount of bumpers that were made for it make it particularly hard to get a total for how many are still lost, and I'm not sure what the criteria is to be considered notable for the Lost Media Wiki article. There could be some other ones that are even more notable than the ones listed here, but we'd have no idea if they exist if no one has ever come across them. To this day, the full version of Turban Squidward still hasn't been seen, which is probably my favorite of them all. So if you come across any content from this blog on VHS tapes, or uploads that the community isn't aware of yet, it could have any of these bumpers in it, or something completely new that hasn't been documented yet. Coming back full circle to SpongeBob's earlier years, the final topic of this video predates even that of the 1999 press kit, and brings us to the pilot of the show. I feel like every now and then, someone brings up the pilot, questions whether or not it's been found, and begins a debate on what has actually been uploaded online from it. It's kind of confusing actually. Generally speaking, the pilot, which is the first episode of the series, Help Wanted, has been found, and it exists in two different completed versions. The most well-known version is the one that played on TV after the Kids' Choice Awards in 1999, commonly referred to as the 1999 cut. However, an earlier version was discovered to exist from 1997, which contained a slightly different opening and ending sequence, but otherwise was the same thing. There is no long-lost pilot or SpongeBoy Ahoy animation that people tried to pass off as real a few years ago. However, there is a piece of lost media that relates to both the Help Wanted pilot and SpongeBoy that I don't see get brought up often at all, that apparently is real. While looking on the Lost Media Wiki article for deleted scenes from SpongeBob, there was one in particular that caught my eye that I hadn't heard about before. It was fittingly under the Help Wanted section of the article and mentions that the original pilot is only partially found. Now I just told you guys that both versions of the pilot were found and that nothing else in them is lost, so this confused me quite a bit, until I read further. It stated that the original audio, where SpongeBob is referred to as SpongeBoy, is currently lost. So while it doesn't claim that any more animation is missing, apparently an earlier audio recording is, and it predates the SpongeBob name. Unfortunately, there is no source included here, so I was really skeptical of the claim, thinking it was fake and tried to find any other website that mentioned its existence. I didn't come up with much on a Google search, so I thought that it was possible Wikipedia might have a mention or source of this information in their article for Help Wanted. To my surprise, I did find a few sentences about it, stating, originally, the character was to be named SpongeBoy and the show was to be called SpongeBoy Ahoy. However, the Nickelodeon legal department discovered that the name SpongeBoy was already in use for a pencil product. This was discovered after voice acting for the original 7-minute pilot was recorded. Thankfully, this included a source of the information and pointed to a website called The People Speak Radio that had an archived listing of an interview between the station and SpongeBob's voice actor, Tom Kenny, that took place in 2006. This was a good sign, as if there was ever a place for this piece of information to be revealed, an old, forgotten interview with Tom Kenny makes sense. But I wanted to hear him state that SpongeBoy audio was recorded for myself, and not just believe the text in an article. Though unfortunately, upon clicking the link to get the interview page, it seems to not exist anymore. The Wikipedia link simply leads to an error, and even looking it up on the website itself reveals that the People Speak Radio doesn't exist anymore either. I checked the Wayback Machine as well to see if the URL had been saved there, and while it does pull up an audio player with a runtime of close to an hour of content, I couldn't get anything to play from it, even though the bar was running. In one final attempt to get this interview, I noticed there was an option to download it, so I did, thinking it would just download a blank file, but to my surprise, it was actually the whole interview, and I was able to confirm this piece of information as real. For all of you viewers out there, here's rare audio of Tom Kenny confirming SpongeBoy audio was recorded.
He was originally called SpongeBoy, was the name of the cartoon and the name of the character, and then after we had recorded the 7-minute pilot with SpongeBoy and everybody calling him SpongeBoy and him referring to himself as SpongeBoy, the legal department found out that there was some kind of a product, like a mop or something, called the SpongeBoy mop, and they had to change it. So SpongeBob was kind of Steve's kind of last-minute fix, and then he gave him the last name SquarePants, which Yeah, he had no last name when he was SpongeBoy, and it actually turns out to be a much better title, I think.
I'm guessing Nickelodeon still has the master audio of this recording, since they still have the audio to an uncensored recording of Sailor Mouth, as Tom Kenny confirmed. But just as Sailor Mouth is unlikely to ever be released, SpongeBoy's audio probably won't be either. This same piece of information can be found on the SpongeBob wiki and links the same interview with Tom Kenny as a source. Maybe I'm just not in the loop on it and everyone already knows this, but I was surprised to find out that it existed. It feels like one of those pieces of trivia that everyone would constantly reference, but it's not something I come across at all. Even with this piece of information, we really have no way to get it, so it'll remain a rare piece of SpongeBob Lost media along with all the other topics until they're found. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out some of my other Lost Media videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Finn.